Now that you've worked with user input a bit, let's talk about working with strings and numbers. When you get user input using the built-in input function, the result is always a string. There are many other situations in which input is given to a program as a string. Sometimes those strings contain numbers, and they need to be fed into calculations. In this lesson, you'll learn how to deal with strings of numbers. And you'll also see how arithmetic operations work on strings and how they often lead to surprising results. Then you'll learn how to convert between strings and number types. Let's start out in the interactive window. Try this out. I'll have you create a variable called num. Then I'll assign it the string with the number 2 in it. So this is num with a string literal with 2 in it. What if you use the plus operation and say num plus num? What does that do? You might have thought about this already, that it's going to concatenate them together. It doesn't equal 4, but 2 and 2, which is 22. Well, the string 22, not the number. If you took num and you used the asterisk, which is the multiplication operator, and you say, okay, multiply that by 5. Well, that should equal 10, right? Well, in this case, it's going to create a string with the number 2 being repeated 5 times. So you get a string of 5 2s, concatenating them all together. When using strings with arithmetic operators, now you can tell that it behaves a little differently than you might have thought. The plus operator concatenates 2 strings together as you've practiced before, and the asterisk or the star multiplication operator creates multiple copies of a string. And it doesn't matter if the number is on the right side of the expression or the left. Say you had 7 times num. It still sees num as a string. And 7 is just going to be the number of times that the number that's inside of num, the string, is concatenated together. You actually do it with other things, right? You could say 5 times hello. One thing that you can do is, let's say you said the string of 12 multiplied by the string of 3. That will give you a type error. You can't multiply these two together because it says that you can't multiply a sequence of non-int of type string. So the sequence it's talking about is the string 1, 2, which is a sequence of 2 characters, and then trying to multiply it by 3, which is a non-integer string. So this doesn't work. It's raising a type error, and similarly, what if you took the string of 3 and you tried to add it to the number 3 by itself? That gives another type of type error. It says you can only concatenate string, not an int to a string. If an object on either side of the plus is a string, then Python tries to perform a string concatenation. It will only perform in addition if both objects are numbers. You would have to first convert that string 3 into a number before you could add it to 3. Let's look at how to do that. So what do you do with all these strings that you would prefer to be numbers? You're going to use some built-in functions for that. The int function converts objects into whole numbers, or is also known as integers. Sometimes you're going to want objects to be turned into numbers that actually have decimal points. In that case, you'll want to use the built-in float function. Let's try these out. To test this out, head back to idle, and you're going to create a new file. You can use the pull-down menu of File and New, or you can use the key command of Command plus N or Control plus N on Windows to open an edit window. Over here in the edit window, we create a num object, and it will accept the input from a user. And this is the prompt. You're saying enter a number to be doubled. Close that out. So the built-in input function is going to prompt this, and then whatever the value that's typed in will be assigned to the variable num. Then to create doubled num, you will say num is multiplied by 2. Then the print output. Great. Go ahead and save that. I'll call it doubled or doubled.py. And again, just save it to my desktop. In this case, if you pressed F5 to run it over here, it's asking you for a number to be doubled. And I will say, oh, 6 please. Oh, you see my error? I created a variable with the wrong name here. I didn't use the correct name again, so I need to either change it here or change it there. So I'm going to change it here or change it there and save. So a little name error issue. All right, now that I've saved it, we can run it again. Okay, this time now I can type 6. Instead of getting 6 times 2 of 12, I get 66. So 6 and 6 because it's doing that for 2 strings. So we've got to figure out how to change this. Open up a new shell window here to kind of clean things up a little bit. You can keep going in yours. I just want to not have so much typing on the bottom. So how can you work with this? Well, we were dealing with the number 6 earlier. What you can do, again, instead of just working with the number 6 by itself as a string, is you can convert a string like 6 into an integer. And you can see int will convert that into an actual number value of 6 here. It doesn't have the quotation marks around it like a string literal. int stands for integer and converts objects into whole numbers, whereas float is going to convert it to a number with a decimal point. So if I were to use float for 6, you'll see 6.0. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, what we can do is convert it here and say int for the number. This is one solution. Let's try it out. So I just saved it again. If I press F5 to run it, oh, this time let's say 12. Great. There, 12 multiplied by 2 is 24. But what if I wanted to type in, I don't know, 2.5? Well, then we would need it to be a float. And it wouldn't be bad if this were 12.0. So maybe it would be safer, depending on what we want to type in, a little more flexible to use float instead. So I'm going to do that. And let's run it after saving. Now, if I were to, like I said, type 2.5, oops, I forgot to change the int to float here. Did you notice my error? Yes. Now let's run again and type 2.5. It'll say 5.0. Or even if I were to run it again and type in 12.0 or even 12 by itself, it will come back as a floating point. Why did we use float instead of int? If you gave the built-in int function something that is not in base 10, like if you were to say 2.5, it gets a little angry. It says that's an invalid literal for int with this requirement of base 10. So even if you said 12.0, you get the same kind of error. So float gives you a lot more flexibility depending on the string that you're putting into it. Sometimes you need to convert a number into a string. To do that reverse, there is a function for it too. Let me give you an example. Let's say we're going to do some concatenation again. Let's say we have a variable called the number apples, and it's currently 4. You're super hungry and you say, I am going to eat. Then concatenate the number of apples to another string with apples in it. Automatically print that out and insert the number. Well, you can only concatenate a string, not an integer to a string. Since the variable num apples is a number, Python can't concatenate it with the other string. You need to convert the num apples integer into a string. And that's where we use the built-in str function. Just like int and float, there's a built-in function str that returns a string version of an object. And here you can add the built-in str function, which takes an object and outputs it into a string. Great. Let's see if that works. Yep, that works great. What's kind of cool is the built-in str function can actually handle arithmetic expressions right inside of it. So let's say you had a total apples that was 4. And these are how many that you've eaten so far, which is 2. So we've assigned 2 variables, total apples to the integer 4 and apples eaten to the integer 2. And you want to create a string that says only space concatenate. And this time you're converting to a string. And you're going to say the total apples minus the apples that have been eaten and concatenate that to show the number of apples that are left. So it can do that subtraction right inside there.